Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Casimir. I'm from Macmillan Education. I'd like to welcome you all today to our English Wednesdays. I'm happy here to present my friend and colleague, Ollie Wood. He'll be discussing mediation. And since we've only got about an hour, I'll pass the mic over to him. I would just like to remind everyone, I will be monitoring questions, as will Ollie, and we'll have about 5 minutes at the end of the seminar to maybe go over a few of those questions if he's unable to answer them during the presentation. So without further ado, over to you, Ollie. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Casimir. Okay then, so hello, my name is Ollie Wood and I'm a teacher and teacher trainer based in Calabria. And today we're going to discuss linguistic mediation. I guess many of you are probably thinking, well, what on earth is mediation? Or perhaps if you already have an idea, you're thinking, how can I apply mediation in my classroom? Well, don't worry, I'm here to help. So I do understand if the idea of mediation in the language classroom feels strange, but I'm going to show you this is only because it's unfamiliar. The truth is, and this may surprise you, that mediation is everywhere. Mediation is an ever-present part of our daily lives. We're constantly mediating in our own language, yeah? You mediate every day in your mother tongue, and more than likely in any other language that you speak. So what do we mediate? Well, we mediate texts first and foremost, whether written or spoken, and they can come in the form of a video, a lecture, a speech, a creative piece of writing, a blog post, information from a website, an article, anything. Now, to mediate texts successfully, the mediator will need to carry out certain mediation activities, like, for example, relaying specific information, taking notes, showing criticism, or even comparing things and giving their opinion at times. We also mediate concepts. When we work collaboratively, helping other people in our group interact with each other, or when we work to construct meaning together. Similarly, leading group work implies mediating when we manage interactions among group members and encourage conceptual work. Teachers, for example, are constantly leading group work in their lessons. Finally, we mediate communication. We do this when we act as intermediaries in informal situations, or when we act as facilitators in delicate situations and disagreements. So, to kick things off, it's over to you. I'd like to know, how familiar are you with mediation? Perhaps you've heard about it from a colleague or a publisher, or this is your first time hearing about mediation. Maybe you're already using mediation activities in your classroom. Anyway, while you're sending in your answers, I'll say that one more time. How familiar are you with mediation? So I'm waiting for you to send your answers into the chat for me. You can just write something like very familiar, or I don't know anything, or somewhere between the two. Okay, here we go. Pretty familiar with it. Great. Anyone else? How familiar are you with mediation? Okay, not enough self-taught. That I understand. I think lots of us are probably in that permission. We usually mediate. Yes, Lara, that's true. But I don't know much. Okay, so we've got 3 versions of it there from top to bottom. Not much. Come on, people, give me some more. how familiar with mediation, probably unaware of using it. I think that's probably the case for a lot of people, Lucia, that we mediate, and you probably have your students mediating in the classroom, but just aren't too sure that they're doing it. Yeah, I agree, Rosaria. As teachers, we mediate constantly. Absolutely true, 100%. Okay, Paola is here to know. Good. I like that. Right, not very much. Super. Okay, thank you very much. I'm happy with those responses. If you didn't type just now, next time there are going to be some more questions. So basically, by the end of this webinar, I hope that all of you, no matter your current experience level, will have a much clearer understanding of what mediation is and how we can use mediation activities in our classrooms to help our learners. Now, I always think a good place to start is with some examples. So let's do that. Imagine, for our first example, that your grandfather or another elderly relative has just received a letter from, say, the tax office. And he doesn't really understand it because it's very technical and very specific. So he asks you for help. So you're going to help him to understand that letter by making it much simpler and by using less complicated words. You'll make sure that he'll be able to understand the message. You're not going to tell him every little detail, but just the most relevant parts. Well, congratulations. In conveying the meaning of this letter to your grandfather, using much simpler vocabulary and focusing on what's relevant, you performed linguistic mediation. I'll give you another example, which I almost did a moment ago. So this is something that actually happened to me in real life. So when I first became an English teacher, I traveled a lot. I really traveled a lot. And sometimes I would move to a new country every year. And it was not unusual for me to not speak the language of the country that I was working in. Well, when I went to live and work in Egypt, I needed a lot of paperwork, and I did not speak Arabic. So I went to an agency that helped foreign people settle down in the country. And this agency helped with residency papers, medical registration, the opening of contracts for, electricity and the internet, and with getting identity cards, all this sort of thing. So when I first arrived in Cairo, I went with someone from this agency to an office, and they helped me with the entire registration process. Now, I could not understand any Arabic. I can't underline that enough. I went to Egypt knowing nothing. So this person from the agency was there in the middle, passing all the information in Arabic to me in English, so that I could understand everything that I had to do. Well, this is another example of mediation. Let me give you one more example. And remember these are our 3 examples that we're going to come back to. So this is another real life example of mediation, one that some of you may be familiar with. Maybe it's happened to you. So as I mentioned at the start of this webinar, I live here in Italy, but I have family in the UK. So before the pandemic, I used to travel from Calabria to Wales, my home, reasonably regularly. This journey means changing planes in Rome or Milan, but normally Rome. Now, on one journey, when I was waiting for my plane in Rome, there was a long announcement about some changes that were being made. They were changing the time of the flight, the gate, the number of cabin bags that were being allowed on board, and the order in which we were allowed to board. Everything was changing. Well, It wasn't long, detailed announcement, and it was given in Italian and then in English. At the end of this announcement, a man sitting next to me looked over and asked for my help. He was from the Ukraine, and he was a little bit lost because he only spoke a little English and no Italian. He said, I'm sorry, I didn't understand the whole announcement. Can you tell me what that was about? So, what did I have to do? I had to summarize the announcement and convey it to him in a more basic English. I had to make sure that he understood the most important parts of the announcement. Well, this is another example of linguistic mediation. Okay, so we've got some examples now, but what is mediation? In very general terms, it's a type of interaction that takes place among people that are unable to communicate. When speakers do not speak the same language, or when speakers do speak the same language, but one of them has a wider or more specific knowledge of the common language. Let's think back then to one of the examples that I gave. You remember the one about the elderly relative receiving a letter from the tax office? Well, obviously here, your grandfather speaks the language, but in this case, the language is too complicated and too technical. Additionally, someone may not understand a message because of accessibility. Imagine a blind person that obviously cannot read a written letter. So a mediator comes in to help them understand the message. The bottom line is that there is a person who cannot understand a message for whatever reason, and a mediator comes in to help that person understand the message. This is mediation. But in the classroom, and we'll look at this shortly, it's also a way to provide learners with more varied and effective communication strategies, as explicitly stated in the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages. It's a very powerful tool for the modern language classroom, as it allows us to depict what's happening around the world, so citizens are ready to meet the needs of our increasingly multicultural societies when the moment comes. Okay, so before we go any further, I'd like to know if we all broadly understand mediation at this point. Don't worry about how it can be applied practically at this point. We'll get there later on. But do you understand the broad definition? In other words, if a colleague asked you, what is mediation? Could you answer their question? I'll say that one more time. Do you understand the concept of mediation? You can just pop a simple yes or no in the chat box, or if you'd like to ask any questions about the definition of mediation, then you can do that at this point too. Okay, so it's looking good. So we've got lots of yeses, quite clear. I think so. That's clear. Good. That makes me happy. Yes, it's clear. I'm going to wait for 3 more yeses before I carry on. Come on, type to me. Yup. Okay, yep, I'll take that too. Thank you, Francesca. Come on, 2 more. Yes, it's clear. Okay, 1 more. I've got one there from Antonella. Yes, I do. Mediation is facilitating, and now a whole string of yeses. Okay, wonderful. You can stop there. That's good. Thank you very much. Super. Okay. So, now that you all clearly have understood the concept of mediation, let's talk about the types of mediation, of which there are 2. It breaks down like this. Is mediation taking place in the same language or across different languages? So, again, you remember the example I gave you about the elderly relative and the letter from the tax office? Well, here the mediation is perhaps obviously in the same language. You get the information, in our case, in Italian, and then you relay the information in Italian as well for your grandfather. This is called intralinguistic mediation, so in the same language. Now, in the other example, where I went with an agency to the police station in Egypt, the authorities gave the information in Arabic, and the agency relayed the information to me in English. This is interlinguistic or cross-linguistic mediation, where you have different languages being used. One of the common misunderstandings with cross-linguistic mediation is to think that it is just translation. Well, obviously, the mediator will need to translate or interpret parts of the text he or she is mediating, but they'll also need to rephrase, summarize, and select relevant information for their interlocutor. Activities that fall far from the realm of professional translators and interpreters. So let's put it this way. Translation and interpretation do belong to the activities within mediation, but they're among many others. So now we know what mediation is, and we know the types of mediation that exist. Let's think about the strategies that are needed to mediate effectively. And perhaps more importantly for our students, what kind of things they are asked to do in a mediation activity. So there are 5 principal mediation strategies. The first is streamlining. In the language classroom, this usually involves reading a long text and then streamlining it for a particular audience. A task could be along the lines of your friend didn't have time to read the book chapter and wants you to tell him the main points. Now, you'll see a little later on that this is closely connected to summarizing, but with a distinct difference. So hold that thought for now. The second strategy, as you can see there, is paraphrasing. And this is probably my favorite. For our students, the main goal here is not to copy or repeat the same words in a particular text. Again, there'll be some sort of situation that makes this clear. Something like your friend doesn't understand something and needs you to explain it in your own words. So here, there's a clear need for paraphrasing. Finding similar ways to say the same thing is a vital skill to have in another language, and probably the reason that I like it so much. Now, the third strategy we have is adapting. So you remember what I told you about the grandfather and the letter from the tax office, that example that I keep coming back to? Well, he speaks your language, but obviously you need to adapt it. You need to make the text less formal, a little less specific or less technical so that he can understand it. To aid communication, you adapt the language of the letter. Now, a fourth strategy is clarifying. You might have to clarify something for cultural reasons. I'll give you another example. I remember a long time ago now, I was working in Cardiff in Wales, and I had a student from Sri Lanka. Well, he came into the class one Monday morning and he asked me, Ollie, why does nobody speak on the train or the bus or any public transport? Well, that's a good question. The answer to which required me to clarify that in Eastern countries, like India, Pakistan, or Sri Lanka, the meaning of physical proximity is different from that in Western countries. In Western culture, people share physical proximity or closeness only with people they know. So please remember, though, that this was pre-pandemic and things have changed now. But anyway, I clarified that this was the reason he could find a calm, quiet environment on public transport. Now, although what I've said there isn't language related, it's cultural. And we'll come back to this in a moment, because obviously with mediation, it's not just about the words, it's also about the culture and the culture that's attached to those words. So the fifth strategy, the final strategy, the one that is at the bottom there, I know you've been waiting for me to talk about, is translating. Now, for many years, certain methodologies, such as the communicative approach, so for the last 40 odd years, looked to try and ban the L1 from the L2 classroom. However, this was wrong. We can't pretend that someone doesn't have a mother tongue. Indeed, I'd suggest that acknowledging the mother tongue and using it to aid in the learning of the L2 is a powerful tool. Furthermore, translation as a mediation strategy is an incredibly important life skill. Now remember, mediation activities are not translation activities, but involve translating certain concepts. Indeed, for certain terms, it's impossible to paraphrase them. To give a quick basic example, if you have to tell someone what an arancino is in English, you have to translate it as rice ball, because there's no way of aiding communication through summarizing or paraphrasing. You have to translate the word. Now, because translating has become, for want of a better expression, a bit of a dirty word recently, let's talk a little bit more about it. Translation can be a great ally in the ESL classroom if it's used in a well-structured activity that calls for an activation of knowledge that's been previously acquired in class. Providing a contextualized task, translation is highly effective when serving a communicative purpose. It can help prevent the fossilization of mistakes at early stages as students reflect on the influence that their mother tongue has on their learning process. As students become aware of the difference between their mother tongue and their second language, self-correction is activated, and soon interference from their mother tongue starts to be anticipated. Similarly, we have contrastive analysis between the mother tongue and the second language. Again, this is a very positive type of practice, as it contributes to reflecting on the way both languages are structured differently. So let's look at the example I have on the screen now. While you quickly read it, I'm very going to quickly drink so I can continue speaking. And I should very quickly point out at the same time that this exercise that you can see, and all of the exercises you'll see in this webinar, come from the book Get Inside Grammar from Macmillan Education. It's an excellent book, and I highly recommend it for all the reasons you'll see over the next 20, 30 minutes. So anyway, as you can see, this is a very simple translation exercise that gets the students thinking about the present simple of the verb to be. It gets them thinking about how it's used in English and how it's not used in Italian. It's clear right from the first sentence where this mediation activity directly contrasts English and Italian auxiliary verbs. Okay, let's quickly review where we got to. Now, to carry out mediation and to do so successfully, we need to activate a series of strategies as described in the Common European Framework. And these strategies serve two main purposes: explaining new concepts and simplifying a text. Just now, I briefly described the big strategies, those 5 strategies that I went through. However, we can and probably should break these down further. So among the strategies to explain a new concept, we find linking to previous knowledge, adapting the language, and breaking down complicated information. I think this is fairly straightforward to understand. However, explaining new concepts is not something that our students are going to do very often, at least not in school. Later in life, though, this will become very important, especially if they work in a multilingual environment. If you want an example, well, it's me right now. I'm explaining a new concept, linguistic mediation, to all of you. Furthermore, I've used all three of these strategies. Firstly, I've tried to link, I hope, the ideas here to your existing knowledge. I've done this through the examples I've given, the letter from the tax office, the agency in Egypt, my airport conversation, and in my decision to focus on the familiar, such as translation. Secondly, I have adapted the language of the CEFR companion volume to make it more accessible for you. My intention is for this webinar to feel more conversational and less academic, and therefore more memorable, again, hopefully. For your reference, so you can see the extent to which I have adapted, the original document looks like this. I'll read it so we're all on the same page, but in both the receptive and productive modes, the written and or oral activities of mediation make communication possible between persons who are unable, for whatever reason, to communicate with each other directly. Translation or interpretation, a paraphrase, summary or record, provides for a third party a reformulation of a source text to which the third party does not have direct access. Mediation language activities, reprocessing an existing text, occupy an important place in the normal linguistic functioning of our societies. So, as you can see, in this text, they've packed a lot of information into a very short paragraph. And so I've hit my third strategy by breaking this complicated information down for you. I've taken a few sentences and turned them into a whole webinar. Okay, so let's focus then on the type of mediation that will be more common in our classroom, simplifying a text. The strategies that our students must employ here need to make it more accessible and easier to understand. Contradictory as it may seem, when the text is dense, the mediator will need to expand on it so as to simplify it, giving examples and adding explanations to make it easier and more accessible for his or her interlocutor. Whereas if the text is long, we'll need to streamline it so just the main ideas are distilled. The actions we tend to carry out here are detecting relevant information, highlighting key aspects, and leaving out repetitions. And if we're helping someone select among several options, there may also be some comparing, contrasting, and drawing conclusions. Now, I truly think the best way for me to exemplify this is to show you a mediation activity in progress. So in just a moment, you will see a student, Antonella, attempt this task. There we go. I'll just shut up for a second to let you read the task that you can see on the screen there. I'll just give you 30 seconds or so. I'll drink while you read. So for anyone here that doesn't read Italian, although I doubt there are many of you, this activity is asking the student to use the text, which is clearly in Italian, to tell her American friend about a cathedral in Palermo in English. So let's see how she gets on.
The Duomo of Monreale is a building protected by UNESCO. It was built by Guglielmo II in 1172. It has a very easy shape, very simple shape, and inside there are 3 parts of 18 columns, 9 columns in every side. In 130 stories from the Old and the New Testament are painted in it. And every year this building is visited by 200,000 people.
Now, I think it's fair to say that Antonella nailed that. You could see her detecting the relevant information, highlighting the key aspects, all in real time. 2 of our 3 strategies. In this case, there were no repetitions for her to leave out. Bear in mind, this task you're looking at here is aimed at A2 plus B1. So it would be unreasonable to expect to start analyzing for repetitions at this level. Now, something that you probably noticed here is the evolution of the task. With the first example that I showed you, so number 7 here, it would be easy to dismiss mediation as just another word for translation, or just another translation exercise. However, here, with this activity, number 17 in front of you, you can see that this really is not the case. Yes, Antonella is carrying out some translation. She has to read the Italian and find ways of expressing these ideas in English. But, to be clear, she's not doing a word-for-word translation. She's mediating. She's streamlining, paraphrasing, adapting, clarifying, and yes, translating. She's clearly using a variety of strategies in order to mediate the text for her American friend. Okay, so let's dig a little deeper. So far, I have showed you that there are 5 main mediation strategies: streamlining, paraphrasing, adapting, clarifying, and translating. I've also showed you how these can be broken down further depending on the type of mediation you're carrying out, simplifying a text or explaining a new concept. Well, I'm sure that you'll be delighted to know that we can scratch below the surface of these activities to find micro skills. Now, micro skills are a set of abilities that we need to activate to fulfill mediation strategies and in turn succeed at mediation. The most common micro skills are these ones that you have in front of you: summarizing, clarifying, synthesizing, rephrasing, adopting the language or the cultural reference. So this is what I mentioned earlier about the student from Sri Lanka. Adopting a cultural reference is all part of mediation. We also have translating and interpreting. And finally, negotiating sense and intention. I'm sure you have a lot of questions right now. you may be asking yourself, okay, fine. So what's the difference between a strategy and a microskill? It's a good question. Well, basically, we can say that microskills are those little abilities that can be taught and practiced, and that when done well, will help you successfully carry out one of the strategies. Microskills are the smallest units of action in constructing a good mediation performance. So, looking at mediation the other way around, from bottom to top, we could explain it in the following way. If we use a microskill like synthesizing, so the third one down on this list, what we're doing is constructing strategy, paraphrasing. So remember, paraphrasing is an activity. How do you do it? Well, you paraphrase by synthesizing the text. If we rephrase, what we're doing is adapting the text. When we're summarizing, as I mentioned all the way at the beginning of this webinar, what we're really doing is then streamlining the text. And all these microskills make up the strategies we need for good mediation practice. If that sounds complicated, which admittedly it can do, well, let's break it down further with another video so you can see these microskills in action. So this time, Antonella, the student that I seconded into doing all of these activities for me, is with her parents in the UK. They're on the motorway and the traffic is just not moving. So her dad asks her to listen to the radio and find out what's going on. So this is slightly different from the last cross-linguistic mediation activity you saw, because here Antonella has to mediate from English to Italian. So you know, she listened to the audio twice, with a short break between the lessons for her to catch up and edit, like you would do in the classroom. So in the video you're about to watch, you'll see that I've sped the video up ever so slightly, so you're not watching her do all the reading and writing in real time, because we'll be here a bit longer than intended. However, you are going to hear the audio twice. Why? Well, on your first listen, just take in the message. Listen to it. Think about how you would mediate it. So if you were in the car and your dad asked you, what's going on, how would you mediate it? Then on the second listen, compare what Antonella has written to what you're hearing. I'll show you. It'll come up on the video. Antonella's text is a little messy. I didn't let her practice this. So what you're getting is really what she did. You'll be able to make it out, though, I'm sure. Read what she's done, compare it to what you're hearing, compare it to how you would have mediated it. Now remember, it's not a translation, it's a mediation. So think about all of those micro skills. Can you see them in action? Okay then, let's do this. So here's Antonella. Again, you'll hear this twice. First listen, taking the message. Second listen, compare what you hear to Antonella. Enjoy.
News has just come in of a major accident on the M6. It appears that a lorry has just overturned, blocking the road. 5 cars have hit it and are involved in a pile-up. Helicopters have just arrived on the scene to take the injured to hospital. Fortunately, it appears no one has died. We have a reporter at the scene of the accident. He has promised to contact us with news as soon as possible. News has just come in of a major accident on the M6. It appears that a lorry has just overturned, blocking the road. 5 cars have hit it and are involved in a pile-up. Helicopters have just arrived on the scene to take the injured to hospital. Fortunately, it appears no one has died. We have just sent a reporter to the scene of the accident. He has promised to contact us with news as soon as possible.
So there you have it. As you could see and hear, by one little error, the N6 rather than the M6, Antonella has mediated the radio announcement. Now, before I tell you what I think, could you get in the chat there? Tell me what you think. What micro skills did you see? Just generally, what's your commentary? If you had a student do this activity in class, that was the audio, this is the piece of paper they handed to you afterwards, what would you say? How would you feel about it? Antonella looks brilliant. She was writing very fast. So come on then, we're in the chat. So use no syntax, points, concepts, use keywords. So Carmela, you're satisfied with it. Okay. So if you were grading it, you'd give her what, a 6, 7? Yeah, Patrizia, I agree. She got the message. Give me more. I can wait, we have time. Okay, Manuela says good summary, all right. So I've had a couple of good summaries coming in. Only main information, okay, very good task-based activity. 8+, Rosaria, that's very generous of you, I like it. So think again, you heard that radio announcement twice. You should have it more or less in your head. Has Antonella mediated it? Has she mediated it? Don't be shy. Okay, all right, we're getting detailed. Yes, good work. Concentrating, main points. Okay, there's lots of positive comments coming out. Is anyone going to be brave enough to say anything negative? Anyone? Oh, as I say that, I read Daniel's comment there, rather patchy, but all in all acceptable. Okay. Carla, yeah, she's mediated well, gets the message across. Interlinguistic mediation, correct, Maria Cristina, absolutely. Antonella has mediated, her father knows more than he needs. Right, that's the kind of thing I was looking for. Thank you, Maria Teresa. You can stop typing if you're still doing so. So what Maria Teresa just said is exactly on point. Mediation is about getting that message across. Is all the information important? No, probably not. So all in all here, Antonella was highly effective in mediating the radio announcement. I forget who now, somebody said an 8+. I agree. If you think this B1 student heard that twice, this is what we've got. The question is, does her father know what the problem is? I can't see any way to say no to that. There's all the information here. We know where it is, assuming she writes M instead of N. We know where it is. We know what's happened. We know what's going on. All the way to the fact there's a reporter on the scene. It'll be providing more information shortly. So many of the aforementioned micro skills are clearly in action. They have to be. She would not be able to produce this text without it. She summarized well, as lots of you just mentioned. She's left out any unnecessary detail, like the lorry overturning. I mean, who cares? That's not important, right? Also, the language there is quite high level. Overturn. She's clarified in here. She's clarified that nobody was killed. And I think that's something important to get across because that changes the whole tone of the text. So maybe it's not essential information for the father, but it's something that's nice to get across. There's plenty of rephrasing happening. Probably 2 reasons for this, or even 3. Let's say synthesis, brevity, and probably linguistic. I think Antonella's probably heard some phrases here, didn't understand some of the words, but she understood the gist of it, which is what she's put on paper for us. There's been no need for adoption here. The formality is kind of the same. Instead, she has directly translated some key words, as you can see here, like reporter. All in all, sense and intonation have been exceptionally well negotiated. If someone gave you this and said, what's the problem? You'd have no choice but go, yeah, I know exactly what the problem is. There's been an accident on the motorway and nobody's going anywhere. But a reporter is going to keep us updated. We have all the information we need. It's mediation well done. And here you can see why mediation is not translation. If this was a translation exercise, yeah, Antonella didn't do very well. And she's missed out huge chunks of it. She's skipped over a lot of words. She's changed the grammar. She's changed the tone. So as a translation, no, I wouldn't be very impressed. As mediation in an ELTon classroom, she's on point, absolutely on point. Well, I'm racing towards the end of this webinar now, but I have one more question for you before I give you my final thoughts and we have some questions. So now that you've heard about mediation and seen a few examples of mediation activities in action, I'd like to know if you would like to try and incorporate some mediation activities into your lessons. Do you see yourself building mediation microskills into your lessons? Can you see your students moving away from word-to-word translations and over to clarifying and synthesizing, which have much more practical, real-world implications? So how likely are you to incorporate some mediation activities into your lessons? Get typing again. And I will carry on drinking from my bottle while I wait for you to chat with me. How likely are you to incorporate some mediation activities into your lessons? Okay, so straight away I've got 3 different answers there. Yes, good idea, excellent. Then Ronaldo telling me I do this all the time, in which case, fantastic, you are ahead of the game. We've got, I think it'll improve my lessons. Oh, Rosario, I'd like to, but I don't know why. I can tell you why, because it's what students do in real life. After we've learned a language, that's what we do, we mediate. If you think back to me in the airport with that guy from the Ukraine, I was mediating for him. I wasn't expecting to. I didn't need to use any of my language skills, not my L2 language skills anyway, but my L1. So other things, I'm not sure how to handle it. Okay. Well, there's a lot to do. I can agree with that. A good place to start is with a good mediation activity. So a good book will help you. So the one I've been using here, as I said earlier, I can highly recommend it. Very, very good book. There's everything you need in there. Get inside grammar. It's a multi-level book as well. And there are lots of nice activities in there, nice mediation activities, both interlinguistic and intralinguistic. Well, it's pleasing. There's a good variety of responses here from yes, awesome, I think you can make it more engaging, to I'm worried and I'm not sure how. If you are in the I'm worried or I'm not sure how bracket, honestly, a good book is a good starting point. And This webinar will be up on YouTube. Go back, have a look at those micro skills that I've mentioned, and start teaching them one by one. That's your starting point. All right, let me give you some final thoughts now as I come to the end of the webinar. As Wilkins puts it, a very famous linguist, in deciding how far we are justified in using the learner's mother tongue, we must remember that the time spent using it is time not spent using the foreign language. So as English teachers, we must always keep sight of our goal, that is helping our students to acquire the ability to think in the target language, in our case, English. The ultimate aim of mediation practice is to make students aware of the natural use of language in both their mother tongue, so Italian, and the ELTon, English. They can identify, like this, L1 interference, and then that prevents them and helps them overcome the fossilization of mistakes. Despite the fact that mediation is a powerful tool in the English classroom, I would advise against using translation systematically to introduce grammatical or lexical structures. Now, some may also argue that mediation can be a very artificial activity, as the context created are very detailed, and the students are asked to play roles which are different from the ones they have in real life. However, if it weren't for dramatization and simulation in the classroom, then functional language wouldn't be practiced meaningfully as if in a real life situation. Well, Casimir is back, and that about wraps up this webinar. But first, I am ready to take any questions that you may have on anything we've talked about today. So please send in your questions, and I will answer as many as I can.
Great, that was wonderful. Thanks, Ollie. Yeah, I did see that there were a few questions and comments, and you know, some people were asking about in terms of levels, like, do you recommend mediation for the lower levels as well as the higher? I think a lot of people have the impression that it's something done better with, say, a B1, B2 group. I don't know what your thoughts on that are.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so mediation, absolutely. You can start using it right from the beginning. So early on, you'll all remember I showed you that very simple translation activity.
In fact, yeah.
Yeah, you know, it was just translating the verb to be, which is used differently between English and Italian. It's not the same. So I am hungry. You can't do a word-for-word translation of that. You're going to end up with something that's incorrect. So
right.
In the beginning, it looks more like translation. Okay, which is why I've spent a lot of time today talking about translation. It does look like it. Mm-hmm. But then, hopefully, as you've seen, by the time you get to the late A2, B1, it's moved on from that. So the two examples we had with Antonella show quite clearly how translation's still there. You're never going to escape it. We all have a mother tongue. It should be embraced. We should use it in the classroom. But it's not all about just translating word for word. It's about getting the message across. And that's what mediation is. It's getting the message across.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I mean, I myself sometimes kind of or at the beginning, at any rate, had some conceptual confusion about that, you know, between, again, something that just looks like a old-fashioned translation, but as you said, it's something that's actually an evolution of that. Yeah,
exactly. It's all about building from that initial translation exercise, where you take it from that.
Right. Okay, I'm looking to see if there are any other questions. It doesn't look like we've got too many others. There were quite a few on translation, which is why I wanted to make sure that I touched on that a little bit, especially at the lower level. So at this stage, I would just like to thank everyone for attending. We still do have a minute or two if any other questions come in, but in the meantime, I'd like to thank Ollie. It was very interesting. The feedback was very positive. I'd like to thank my colleagues at Mondadori for helping us organize this. I'd like to thank all the participants for spending an hour with us. And I would like to remind them of two things. First, that they should be receiving the attestato in the next day or so. But they're also going to be available in a day or two on mondadorieducation.it/attestati. And there will also be another edition of English Wednesdays on the 21st of April, which is in 2 weeks' time, obviously on a Wednesday from 4 to 5, just like today, with Teresa Dowelli, who's a Macmillan colleague from Istanbul in Turkey. I think a lot of our colleagues who are attending this webinar have seen her before, but she'll be speaking about Agenda 2030, which is another, like mediation, something that I think people are hearing a lot about right now. So that's all from my side. Ollie, I don't know if you'd like to add anything else. Otherwise, we can close up here, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, sometimes on LinkedIn, I publish things on mediation. So if anyone wants to learn some more about it, you can find me on there. There aren't too many Ollie Woods, so feel free. Otherwise, thank you all very much for your attention.
Yeah, wonderful. Appreciate it. Thanks, everybody. Have a great afternoon.